The smell hit before the front door even came into view. According to a recent report, the area around Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's new Norfolk home carries a strong scent of wet mud, with one journalist describing the setting as eerie, bleak, and strangely lifeless. For a man who once lived in the grand surroundings of Royal Lodge, that is quite the downgrade, and he is not happy about it. And if the smell of swampy earth with the occasional waft of manure was not enough, reports continue to focus on the out-of-control pest problems around the property. So today we are talking about Andrew's latest move, why it took so long, what visitors allegedly had to say, and how one of the most controversial figures in royal life has ended up in a house being described in some very unflattering terms. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's housing saga has been dragging on for months. After years at Royal Lodge in Windsor, where he had lived since 2003, pressure mounted for him to leave. Reports circulated about disputes over security, money, maintenance, and whether such a large royal property should continue to be occupied by someone no longer carrying out public royal duties. Eventually, attention shifted to Norfolk, where a smaller property known as Marsh Farm was being prepared for him. But, as one would expect, that move did not happen smoothly. He was first said to be staying temporarily at Wood Farm, another property on the Sandringham estate. Wood Farm is well known to royal watchers because it was where Prince Philip spent much of his retirement. It has history, privacy, and a more comfortable reputation. Marsh Farm, however, appears to have inspired a very different reaction. According to reports, renovations had to be completed before Andrew could move in permanently. Weeks passed, then more weeks. During that time, every small development became a headline. Was he refusing to go? Was he delaying? Was the house not ready? The exact behind-the-scenes details is continuing to be revealed, but the move became yet another public embarrassment. Then came Easter Monday, when reports said Andrew finally spent his first night at Marsh Farm. No grand arrival, no smiling photographs, no cheerful family welcome. Just another awkward chapter in a story that seems to get more uncomfortable each year. By all accounts, Andrew has allegedly been furious about the state of the place, from the rat problem to the stench. One journalist who visited the area near Wolferton wrote that the road leading toward the estate felt gloomy and isolated. She noted there were no bustling village shops, no charming local atmosphere, and no sense of warmth. Instead, she described a neglected feel to the garden and said the smell of wet mud took her by surprise. Now, anyone who has spent time in the countryside knows rural areas can smell earthy, damp, and agricultural, depending on the weather. Fields, drainage, marshland, livestock, standing water, all of that can affect the air. But when a report singles out the smell as one of the first memorable details, you know it is not exactly giving palace glamour. And that is the real contrast here. Royal Lodge was a sprawling residence associated with grandeur, status, and privilege. Marsh Farm has been described more like the red brick home of a prosperous middle-class businessman. Perfectly respectable, of course, I think something many of us would simply adore, but it's hardly the image once attached to the Queen's so-called favourite son. That wording stings, because it highlights how dramatically Andrew's position has changed. Once front and centre at major royal events, now the headlines are about mud smells and whether the garden looks neglected. There were also claims that new security systems had been installed ahead of his arrival. That suggests practical concerns remain. Even in disgrace, he still requires protection and privacy. Yet one report also noted there was little privacy around the home itself, which adds another layer of irony. A man who spent years fighting scrutiny now finds himself living somewhere people say is easier to observe. Then we come to the pest issue. Several tabloid reports have referred to Marsh Farm as a swamp home and claimed the area has a rat problem. Now, to be fair, Many rural properties across Britain deal with rats, mice, foxes, moles, and all sorts of wildlife. Older buildings, farmland, feed stores, damp land, and outbuildings can attract pests. This is not unusual in itself. But again, context is everything. And after all the reports about Andrew's personality, we know he cannot be happy about this. When the person moving into such a home is Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, every ordinary inconvenience becomes dramatic. He isn't known to be easygoing or humble in any sense of the word. Allegedly, friends and family have been concerned for his mental state, and the new home is not helping matters. And there is another reason these stories land so strongly. They create a picture of exile. Not official exile, of course, but social exile. He is no longer presented as a central royal figure with influence and prestige. Instead, he is written about as a sidelined relative tucked away in Norfolk, while the working monarchy moves on without him. That image has only grown stronger with the mention of visitors. Reports claimed Prince Edward visited for what was described as a quiet word before Easter. Other headlines used much harsher language, calling Edward a royal henchman sent to get things sorted. Whether that is fair or not, it shows how observers are interpreting family dynamics. Andrew, once senior and powerful, now appears to be the brother being managed. And imagine that shift over time. There was a period when Andrew was regularly seen on overseas trade missions, attending grand ceremonies, travelling with status, and enjoying all the trappings of royal life. Today, coverage focuses on whether his new residence smells unpleasant and whether he was nudged into finally unpacking his bags. It is a remarkable fall in public standing. Of course, supporters would argue that he is still entitled to a private life and a home away from constant judgment. They would say every family has difficult members, every property has flaws, and every headline does not need to be cruel. Critics would counter that he created many of these circumstances himself, and that public sympathy remains limited because of the controversies surrounding him, especially his association with Jeffrey Epstein, which he has repeatedly denied involved wrongdoing. And that tension explains why stories like this attract so much attention. On the surface, it is about a house. Underneath, it is about consequences, status, family power, and what happens when someone, once near the top, finds themselves living a very different reality. Even the location adds atmosphere. Wolverton has its own ghostly quality, with the old railway station nearby standing silent since the 1960s. Once used by royals travelling to Sandringham, it now sits as a relic of another era. There is something fitting about that backdrop, a faded station from a vanished age beside the new home of a man whose own royal era has clearly passed. So where does this go from here? Perhaps Marsh Farm becomes a quiet long-term base and the headlines fade. Perhaps more stories emerge about repairs, neighbours, visitors, or further tensions inside the family. With Andrew, silence rarely lasts for long. But for now, the image is set. A former senior royal, moved out of his old residence, relocated to Norfolk, settling into a house described as bleak, muddy, and battling pests. It is not the sort of royal chapter anyone would have predicted 20 years ago. What do you think? Is Marsh Farm simply an ordinary countryside home being unfairly mocked? Or does it perfectly reflect how far Andrew's fortunes have fallen? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy royal updates like this, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching.